But my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com and also published over on DailyKos.com is titled, "Did Trump Just Light a Fuse He Can't Control?" And, you know, I opened this and I put this on Blue Sky on Saturday. The Washington Post had two headlines that were pretty much back-to-back. On the app, they were literally back-to-back. The first was, they have chosen not to accept our terms, Vance says. It was about the breakdown of the talks in Islamabad. And the other was, the second one was, U.S. intelligence shows China taking a more active role in Iran war. These echo headlines from a century ago, a little more than a century ago, when World War I started. And I'll get to that in just a second. But to set this up, in 2021, China and Iran became military allies. They signed what was described as a broad strategic partnership encompassing economic, diplomatic, and security dimensions. Russia signed a similar agreement in January of last year with Iran. So these three countries are now military allies and formally, officially assisting each other. So hold that thought. And yesterday morning, America's resident madman Donald Trump announced on his Nazi-infested social media site that we, the United States of America, our military, as of 10 o'clock this morning Eastern time, you know, about 2 hours ago, would begin blocking the Strait of Hormuz. That means that all the shipping of oil for China and drones for Russia, which they're using in their war against Ukraine, will be intercepted by us. And this came just hours after the peace talks failed, after, you know, three American grifters with absolutely no diplomatic experience, blew up the talks with Iran. So let me draw the parallels here. 112 years ago this summer, a young Bosnian Serb named Gravilo Princip fired two shots in Sarajevo, killing Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. And what followed was World War I, the most violent, deadly war in the history of humanity at that time. There's a backstory here about the 1908 Bosnian crisis and the 1912 Balkan Wars. I won't go into all the details, but basically what had happened is because of these two prior wars, in part, all the different countries of Europe had all these interlocking security agreements. And so everybody was armed to the teeth and frankly paranoid about everybody else. So when Franz Ferdinand's assassination gave Austria-Hungary an excuse to punish Serbia, their enemy, they took it, right? Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, but Russia had a treaty with Serbia, so they had to jump in against Austria-Hungary. Germany was allied with Austria-Hungary, and when Russia mobilized, they declared a war on Russia. Then the Franco-Russian alliance dragged France in, and then once the fighting started, Germany's Schlieffen Plan required invading France through neutral Belgium, and when they started moving into Belgium, that triggered England's treaty with Belgium and dragged them into, 6 weeks after the shots in Sarajevo, the world was in the middle of World War I, the deadliest, as I said, the deadliest war in human history. I've been thinking about Sarajevo a lot recently. I've mentioned it a couple of times on this program, but, how did we get here? Well, it started out with Benjamin Netanyahu making 6 trips to the White House, telling Trump and his old family friend, Jared Kushner, whose bedroom he used to sleep in when he visited New York back in the 80s, that Iran was ripe for regime change, that the mullahs were one good strike away from failing, and that history was calling. The New York Times makes it clear that Trump's own CIA director and Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, called this farcical and BS in private. But Netanyahu had an overwhelming reason to want us to invade Iran, and that was that he goes to prison. He was on trial for corruption and bribery and breach of trust, and if he loses that trial, he goes to prison. Well, having a war stopped the court case. It actually, on February 28th, his court case ground to a halt because he issued a declaration of emergency. We're at war with Iran. The court case is going to resume this week, by the way. He couldn't push it much beyond that, but So here's Trump facing a crisis. He's accused of raping a 13-year-old and the whole, all the other stuff around that. Whiskey Pete Hegseth, who just loves war. He doesn't even need an excuse. And Netanyahu, who's trying to stay out of prison. And here we are 44 days later, and Netanyahu is strutting around in southern Lebanon, more popular than ever. Looks like he's going to win the next election. And Trump is posting that he's going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. And he said every vessel in international waters, which, by the way, means, number one, that we're claiming we can stop any vessel anywhere in the world, and number two, that's called piracy. Now, China already has assets in the region. They've got a Type 055 cruiser, a Type 052D destroyer, and a massive surveillance ship right now in the Gulf of Oman, which is right up the road. Chinese satellites have been providing real-time targeting and intelligence to Iran throughout this war. Russia has been running electronic warfare systems and providing Iran with the information necessary to target American people, troops, and resources in the region. And, so these are the active military contributions to the Iranian war right now. So what happened? And so now you've got Iran with treaties with Russia and China, and the United States saying we're going to block anything going through the strait, when 80% of the oil going through that strait is going to China on Chinese-flagged vessels. And China has a destroyer in the region to protect Chinese vessels. And then you got Putin, who's like looking at, if he fails in Ukraine or anywhere else, frankly. There's a long history of Russian leaders being assassinated or at least put out to pasture. So, and then of course, Putin just suffered a huge humiliation with Orban's loss in Hungary. So, in 1914, it took 6 weeks until the dogs of all-out war were fully unleashed. This time we're 43 days in, and we have destroyers parked in a mind strait that China needs to stay alive, and Russia would love to see humiliate the United States. This really concerns me. I think that we are possibly at the edge of a World War I kind of scenario, where it just sets off, and we've got a madman in the White House. So please call your members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats. Tell the Democrats to get a damn spine and start impeachment proceedings. I realize, he probably won't be convicted in the Senate. Hold a trial anyway. It'll paralyze what's going on. And tell Republicans to get a spine. 202-224-3121. Congress also has to reassert its constitutional war-making authority. Tell that member of Congress when you call them, or that senator, support the Democrats' war powers resolution. We do not need a nuclear confrontation with Russia and China. And make sure you're registered to vote. All right, this could be our last chance, November 2026. This is our opportunity to do what Hungary did yesterday and kick out, obviously we can't kick out Trump, but we can kick out enough of his sycophants and lickspittles and toadies in the bootlickers in the Congress that we may be able to stop him in some really meaningful and significant ways.